MOROCCO team. Delighted to see such a great turnout for tonight's session, and I can understand that. We have the tremendous honor to have with us tonight the esteemed Professor David Gaba. Oh, you know him. All of us know him for his famous statement, simulation is a technique, not a technology, or the 11 dimensions, of course, of Professor Gaba. He's a distinguished leader in medical education and anesthesiology. He's a leading authority in his field, and especially he's the mentor of my mentor, Professor Mouhawi. So it's really just like a dream come true. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Professor Mouhawi. I know that you already know him, and I know that I don't have to present him, but I will do because I have to. Professor Gaba is the Associate Dean for Immersive and Simulation-Based Learning. He's the Director of the Center for Immersive and Simulation-Based Learning at Stanford University School of Medicine. He's, of course, a Professor of Anesthesiology, Operative and Pain Medicine, Anesthesiology, I love that. And he's the founder and co-director of the Simulation Center at the Veteran Affairs Palo Alto Healthcare System. He's the inventor of the modern full body patient simulator. And of course, he's an expert in mannequin-based simulation for anesthesia and critical care. It's a great honor, Professor. I'm not going to take the whole hour to present you. It will take 1 hour for that, but I'll just go into cite, some of your accolades that include the C. Duke Awards for Innovation in Anesthesia Education, the David M. Worthen Award, the IRS Teaching Recognition, the Kaiser Award for Innovation Contribution to Medical Education. Your work has profoundly impacted anesthesiology, education, and patient safety. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing with us your insights about the past, the present, and the future of simulation healthcare. Thank you so much, Professor Gaba. Before giving you the stage, I just want to precise that the webinar will last 1 hour, including the QA session. I invite the audience to share their thoughts with our presenter, our presenter, by writing the question via the link. I'll try to transmit all of them at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much, Professor Gaba. The stage is all yours.
Well, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I will switch to the presentation mode. So I wanted to thank my colleague and friend, Dr. Mouhawi, for inviting me to speak to you today. And I'm excited about all the simulation activities I've heard about in Casablanca and all of Morocco. And given that we have people from many different places online today, I'm excited about all the activities in simulation that have spread to pretty much the entire world, and I'm very grateful for all the work that everybody's done. So I know that probably a lot of people have heard about, as you mentioned, my slogan that simulation is a technique, not a technology, but I'm going to say it again, and it's to allow us to utilize and give the immersive activities that recreate the experiences of real world settings. I've tried for years to get medical students to lie on the table for anesthesia simulations, but I've been completely unable to do that. So we're stuck with the mannequins and things like that, which I'll talk about the different choices momentarily, because there are many modalities of simulation and there's many things that count as simulation. It's not just the technological things. And both simple and complex modalities of simulation are useful, and depending on the many different kinds of places in which we might be doing simulation for improving patient safety and patient outcome, we need to choose the right modalities for the right kind of activities. Okay, let's see. I need to advance my slides and it's not working. So, okay, that'll work. So I want to go through some of the non-technological kinds of simulation because a lot of times, including people who are in the business of simulation, but a lot of people who aren't familiar with it always thought of as these technologies, especially the newer technologies of computerized things, and I'll get into the future of simulation. But there's an awful lot that can be done and is being done with non-technological kinds of simulation, starting with storytelling. Clinicians have always talked to each other about their challenging cases. And when a colleague tells a story about their situation, what we hear in our head is, what would I do if I was in that situation? And stories can be told by participants in simulation, by instructors, or by both. And those kinds of experiences and talking about them is extremely useful and is a form of simulation. Similarly, there are kinds of simulation that are just verbal that I call what if questions. And that's more or less a structured conversation about a clinical situation in which we explicitly ask at various points, what would you do if you were faced with a certain kind of clinical situation? That again is something that people have done for a long time, but this has a little more special attention to what we're trying to get at by asking these questions. And these kinds of verbal simulations can be supplemented by photographs, by videos, or by relatively low technology kinds of things. I show one of the many things that's available out there is an application for a phone or an iPad called Simmon that some of my colleagues use, which allows creating what looks like the clinical display as we might see in an operating room or intensive care emergency department. And one person's phone or iPad couldn't control the display on the other person's phone or iPad. So it's relatively low technology, but allows us to give the kinds of information that we're used to seeing in those kinds of situations. But essentially, it just enhances the verbal simulation. Then role-playing verbally is a simulation. And this can be done by the participants themselves or with or without the participation of the instructors in a course. They can take the role of clinician or of patient and for other participants. And when this is done in a debriefing, I call this a mini or a micro role play. But role playing in general should be thought of largely as a trigger for more formal discussions that is a debriefing. But again, just with the verbal participation of the people in the simulation setting. Some other non-technological simulation is the use of what we in the United States call standardized patient. I always add the term actors after that because not everybody understands what is meant by standardized patient. But we're talking about actors, the use of typically highly experienced actors to be the standardized patients or to play other roles such as family member, friends of the patient, and so forth. And this is very widespread, is used extensively for training of medical students and other more early learners in healthcare. And the use of professional actors gives us some real advantages. And here in the Bay Area of California, it's fortunate that we have many actors in this whole area, and there's not enough roles for all of them to be playing and doing real theater and other acting. But we're fortunate to be able to utilize them. We pay them, of course. And what the professional actors bring to the table is they can do very good reproducible portrayal of, say, a patient. So that in the case of our medical students, say, all the students who rotate through an encounter with a specific actor playing a specific role, they're going to get essentially the same portrayal of a patient as their colleagues have undergone either a few minutes previously or earlier in the day or whatever. Those of us who would like to be actors but aren't really professional actors like me, we're not able to do that reproducibility in the way that the professionals are. And in our settings here, and this may be true in other settings, but we also utilize the actors to evaluate the performance of the participants and to give feedback. Because even though the actors are not clinicians, they've been highly trained to be able to do this kind of evaluation and feedback, not about the medical things per se, for the most part, but overall how they interacted with the patient. And that's extremely useful. Now, there have been occasions, especially at the Veterans Hospital, where we don't really have the same access to professional actors, and we use some non-professional people, including people who have been patients in the Veterans Hospital, or people who had family members who have been in that hospital. And some of them who serve on a veteran and family council have volunteered to act as actors, even though they're not formally trained as actors. And what they bring to the table is that they have the knowledge and experience of what it's like to be a patient in that institution, or to be a family member for a veteran who's been in our clinical environment. And even though they're not real actors, they bring to the table this this realism of the actual encounter. So that can be very useful as well. Another non-technological one is, despite what our mothers told us, it can pay to play with your food. Food is an important part task trainer in simulation. And so we've used a variety of things that can be purchased at the grocery store, or from a butcher shop. But you see different things portrayed here, including one of my colleagues showing somebody, an anesthesiologist who's just starting out, of how to do an epidural anesthetic for often for childbirth, but can be for other things. And watermelons make really good task trainers for that, for a variety of reasons. So again, we don't have to necessarily spend a lot of money in buying very expensive devices. All of these different modalities can be really useful in various ways to do simulation. But of course, we do like the technological simulation modalities, and it's part of, as was mentioned, of my claim to fame. Um, but they come in a lot of different modalities and different kinds. So for those learning anatomy, there have been a number of virtual or other digital devices to help people learn anatomy. This is a device that's called a virtual dissecting table, but there's lots of other kinds. Um, head-mounted displays and virtual reality, uh, and utilized now in entertainment and to some degree in healthcare. I'll talk about that in a lot more detail later on. Um, and they can be used for learning anatomy, as well as for other purposes. These are people at Children's Hospital in Kentucky who are learning the anatomy of the brain, and some of the neurosurgeons or the early residents in neurosurgery can actually use things like this to practice drilling through the skull and doing other kinds of activities. But this is a technological way to do that, and it stands in. It's much better in some respects than doing book learning. Here's an example from Stanford where our neurosurgeons have their own simulation center. It's about 100 square meters, and they can use it for training. They can use it for surgical case planning before the operation. They do have another display of their system in the operating room, and can step aside to look at certain things. And often these systems are now also coming with augmented reality, where if they wish to, they can wear the goggles while they're doing the operation and can see a superimposition of say the MRI and what they see with their eyes in the operating room. We've all used what I call part task trainers because they only replicate part of a given clinical task for various kinds of vascular access, and for other purposes. This is an old slide, but can be used for other invasive procedures of various kinds. The low technology part task trainers are also useful. They can simulate a task that's part of a bigger picture of patient care. And here shows some, for surgical purposes, some things that may or may not simulate the actual clinical task, but may simulate and help people learn the actual, just the general way that you would use a laparoscopic surgical devices and techniques, but before they, without having to get a very expensive device that replicates every aspect of that. A couple of times a year at Stanford, my colleague Vladimir Nikenzi runs a very large, difficult airway program usually for a couple of days, and bringing in both our own residents and then many people coming from the outside for continuing medical education. And you can see a number of the different types of devices that are used over the course of a couple of days. I can't show them all. Part of what they do in the course of these couple of days is some full-blown simulations, in which it's more complex than just working on a airway mannequin per se, but the whole thing is really quite an undertaking, and there's a lot of people learn a lot of important things in these kinds of activities. There's task trainers for intraosseous vascular access. And here's just some examples of how those devices come. Again, for the laparoscopic surgery training, there are the simple ones, and then shown in the upper right, as viewed by us, is a very complex laparoscopic surgery system that replicates the entire surgical process here. There are part task trainers for endoscopy, whether it's for bronchoscopy or colonoscopy, as shown on the one site. There's an online bronchoscopy simulator that's free for people who sign up for it without having to pay. It's not like manipulating the real thing, but it certainly gives people a good understanding of how it all works. The vascular surgeons or interventional cardiologists or radiologists make use of endovascular simulators, which are actually among the most accurate technological simulators, because there's only so many degrees of freedom of manipulating the catheters and so forth in this kind of work. So those are pretty far along. Our cardiac surgeons have made use of some different modalities of simulation. Some are using the beef heart for valve suturing activities or models that they've developed. And then there's some commercial simulators for off pump, as it's called, without entering the heart, without being on a heart lung machine, a simulator of doing that kind of coronary artery bypass grafting activity. There are also part task trainers, as many of you may know, for electrocardiography, whether transtracheal or sorry, transesophageal or transthoracic. And those have been very useful for a lot of different clinicians from different disciplines. I mentioned SimMon before, of one person controlling the other screen. And that can be added to just the verbal simulation that we're doing. There are also some simulation activities that can use a very simple technology, like a very simple mannequin. And among a couple of programs I know at least a little bit about, and there are surely others, but one is the Helping Babies Breathe program, and the other is a postpartum hemorrhage program. And these have been developed by the foundation. There's a Layerdal Foundation, which is independent of their actual business work, in which simple mannequins have been put into practice all over the world and have been shown to be very helpful. And there's, I think I've got a few examples shown here, but I think it just shows that you don't need something very, very complicated to do a lot of good in the right situations. Now, my simulation past and present was in fact to use technology, not that complicated at first, but more complicated as time has gone on, to recreate more complex clinical settings. This was our very first pre-prototype, and that was done in May of 1986. So what's that, 38 years or so, which is a little hard to believe. And that's me sitting down there. If I didn't have my OR hat on, you'd see I had a lot more hair then. And that's my medical student, Abe Deanda, who was helping me out. Both Abe and I had our original degree in in engineering. And in the background is my anesthesiologist research fellow, Mary Maxwell, who was the participant in the very first simulation we did with only parts of the person and so forth shown there. And then we went to a more complicated system, and Abe is sitting in the back there controlling things on the one computer that's sending information to some of the other devices that are shown there. And one of our highly experienced clinicians is shown going through a standardized suite of events in a single patient care situation. And we were doing research, and we created the simulators originally to do research on the decision making of anesthesiologists managing difficult situations. And we studied both early residents and later residents and highly experienced people as well, and published a number of papers back in the early 1990s. This then became the next generation, and back in the background is my close colleague and friend for many years, Steve Howard, who developed a lot of the simulation things we did from the late 1980s to just recently. He's just retired. And so that was case 1.3. Case stood for what was it? Computer augmented simulation environment or something like that. And then I had another medical student engineer, John Williams, who created with me. He did most of the work. He had double degrees in engineering, electrical engineering. We created a whole another version, and that led to the commercialization of our simulator, along with stuff from Howard Schwid and from a company. And we had for 15 years, we had a simulation center in our Veterans Hospital in different parts of the campus as the years went by. And this is what we now have at Stanford that Dr. Muhawe got to see in great detail. So we have a big simulation center at Stanford. It's about 2,800 square meters for many different kinds of simulation. And one of the typical things that we do in our sim centers are mannequin-based simulation in a dedicated simulation center. So we have 900 square feet or square meters at the Veterans Hospital now, and the 2,800 square meters at Stanford. And this is what it looks like. But we also do at all our institutions simulation that takes place in or near the actual clinical environments rather than in a special simulation center. So in Latin, the term in situ means in place, or typically in the simulation setting, we would say in an actual bed or bedside of a patient in a hospital room or an intensive care unit room or in an operating room, but in the actual place where real patient care takes place, and you just happen to be able to get access to that space for an hour or part of a day or a whole day. But it's in the actual place, in the actual work unit where the people work. Now, it turns out that you can't always get such a space because there may be patients in all those beds, or the ORs are full. So I, over the years have noticed that sometimes these things are done in the actual work unit, but not in an actual patient bed, if you will, but maybe in the conference center of that unit, or even in the hallway of that unit. And so I coined the term peri situ, which is Greek for peri is near, and situ is Latin for the place. And so near the place. And that turns out that you get some of the benefits of being in the actual unit where the people actually work. But if you can't get the real bedside, being near the place is really worthwhile as well. So each of the in situ, peri situ have their advantages and disadvantages. Being in a dedicated simulation center has its advantages and disadvantages. Now, one of the things that's really important about the things that happen in situ and peri situ is that they can be used for systems probing. That is, doing the simulation a little bit for training, but really looking for what works well in the clinical system, and what the hidden problems are that are called sometimes latent threats that exist in that arena. And the beauty of doing systems probing is that sometimes if you find a systems problem that's in the environment or in the way that the institution works or whatever, if you can find a systems problem and if you can fix it in the system, then without training, like if you find a problem and you would have to otherwise train 800 nurses how to do X instead of Y, that's awfully hard to do. But if you can fix it in the system, you may be able to fix it for everyone. And that means also for the patients. So doing systems probing, I think, is an important aspect of simulation. I would say that in the planned, dedicated simulations that we do that are scheduled, we're usually doing them for training. About 80–90% is for training, but also when we debrief, we get 10 or 20% also applied to talking about what works and doesn't work well in the real clinical system. But when we do the systems probing, it's about 80% for systems probing and 10 or 20% of instruction and training. So both of those kinds of things can be very important. Here's an example of one of those. This was a set of simulations we did in Stanford Hospital in various places for how the teams dealt with massive hemorrhage events. So this is in an actual patient room. This patient has been seriously vomiting blood. This is a mannequin, of course. And they've called not only the rapid response team, but also because he is not yet in a cardiac arrest, but headed there pretty quickly. So they have the rapid response team and the code team, and these are the real people. They don't know this is going to happen. And when they get there, we tell them, treat it like it's real. And in this case, actually, we were able to, one of our simulation experts, anesthesiologist, intensivist, he donated blood to the blood bank. And then if they called for blood, his actual blood units came up. They had to be processed by the blood bank. But as soon as they came up to the floor there, we exchanged the real blood that was processed by the blood bank for our fake blood that we could give them to actually utilize. So this is the kind of thing where you can explore really all the way that things work in the setting, with people, with how hard it is for everybody to get around in that kind of physical environment and so forth. It can be very powerful. So let's talk about some of the future things. I mean, the future could be a long time, or the future could be short time. So one of the key futures, I think, that already is being explored by many people around the world is fully interactive extended reality, which now goes by the name of XR, for extended reality. And XR is really just one or another form of what's called virtual reality or augmented reality. Augmented reality means you can see the real world while you're seeing an image from the computer, and virtual reality is you're only seeing what the computer creates for you, which of course can be very, very realistic. And so there are already many early efforts in XR in simulation, both academic things created by the experts within academic institutions, and of course by things that are created and available from commercial companies. And I think the next few years and beyond, we'll see very rapid growth, more commercial providers, and for better or for worse, some changing business models, which I think I may mention more about. And also an evolution of the ideas, equipment, software, and curricula for which XR, my experience is more with virtual reality than the others. But there will be a lot of change happening, both in the complexity and the utility of these things in the next few years. So my own initial exploration of full interaction virtual reality was with a company named Simex. Simex was created by a couple of actually residents when they started in emergency medicine, one at Stanford and one at University of California, San Francisco, which are two very, very well-known institutions. And they created a company to do pretty fully interactive VR. And we started with them in the let's see, I guess we started probably around 2017 or so with them. And just before COVID, we started a trial program to see how usable the virtual reality their simulation, which could handle up to 4 people simultaneously in the same environment, and how it would be useful for training in some of the kinds of arenas like anesthesia and emergency medicine, and also internal medicine. What I asked them to do, each of those groups, was to create a scenario that, as it says, is something that would be hard or even impossible to do with mannequin-based simulation that we were all used to. And so I think this was an interesting and useful way to go about it, because it may or may not be useful if it just replicates something we already can do pretty well. And so this was an interesting challenge. So the emergency medicine people created a scenario in which a journalist was sent by helicopter from about, let's see, I have to calculate, but I guess it would be about 500 to 1,000 meters up to the Everest base camp at 5,500 meters. And that's just the base camp, but that's a pretty big jump in altitude. And and it was done, very quickly by a helicopter. So there's no time to accommodate to this higher altitude. And so this particular individual got a severe case of high altitude sickness. And so this is, the virtual recreation of an inflatable, fairly large tent that would be the medical base for individuals who needed medical care at base camp. And there's various kinds of equipment, including a gamma bag, a pressure bag that could be used. And in this virtual reality thing, you can see the two people who are the clinicians are each represented only by their skull, and either red or blue here, and their hands. But of course they could grab things with their hands. They could see things with their eyes, and could talk to each other, of course. So at this point, rather than recreating the whole individual, which may now be possible or soon be possible, that seemed to be enough. But perhaps the most important thing, and it's not as easily seen here, but when I've done this scenario, it was pretty dramatic. That patient looks sick. They look sick in a way that is not easy to do with the mannequin, even with moulage and all our other tricks. This patient looked sick, like, experienced physicians and nurses know what patients look like when they're really sick. And that's really important to be able to assess those things. So that was pretty interesting. Not easy to recreate this in physical simulation. My anesthesia colleagues created a case of a fire on the surgical drapes, triggered by one sort or another. It could have been from a surgical device, or a surgical laser, or there's other things that can trigger a fire. You can see the environment. You can see the anesthesia machine that was created for this, the burn marks that appeared on the drapes, and then you can see as they go to assess and work further on this patient, not only are they doing another assessment and intubation, you can see that there's also been burns on the patient's face. So this is pretty much impossible to create in real physical simulation, because even if we do moulage on the patient with the burns, we can't create a fire in our settings, because it would set off the fire alarms in the actual environment. We don't really want to do that. So another good example of something that's hard to do in real life. Just to mention, the internal medicine people created a patient who was undergoing delirium tremens from alcohol withdrawal. And I haven't seen that one, but my colleagues who have seen it says it's pretty good too. So there are many questions to be answered about extended reality, and the next few years will be pretty interesting about that. We need to figure out what can actually be done, whether better, simpler, cheaper, or all of those things, using XR versus using actors or mannequin-based simulation. And one of the questions is, how realistic will an XR system have to be to nearly equal or surpass physical simulations in terms of learning and the emotional impact for all kinds of different applications in different participant populations? And I think to date we can say, for some more simple things, it almost certainly will be useful, and it may well not require real physical things. But for the more complex things, it's kind of too early to tell at this point, and there will have to be a lot of work done, research, and just experimentation with different kinds of activities, with different kinds of populations, to determine where different things fit in terms of how good they are relative to the other. And it may take quite a while to work through that over the years. And of course, it may be that each of these approaches has benefits and detriments, and that there's some combination of them over an entire career may be useful. Yeah, I just want to say that sometimes I like to put some of this into the issue of, as long as the actual treatment of patients in very challenging situations requires physical human beings addressing in one spot on the patient, working on the patient with the patient, where that's required in real life, that we may or may not be able to recreate the kinds of situations just with virtual reality or other extended reality. It may require being present in the same room and working together to be able to really do that in its full setting. But that remains to be determined in the future. Okay, so another thing for the future is what is already or soon to be the role of artificial intelligence, AI, in assisting simulation in healthcare. In particular, I was asked to give a talk about how large language models and specifically, but maybe other kinds of simulation would be useful in helping us in doing simulations of various sorts. And I would say the most important aspect of artificial intelligence for the future would be to create what I call fully believable, computer-generated, the term in the gaming, for computer games world is non-player characters. That is, characters generated by the computer, but are not the participants in the game itself. And that could be used for many patients. Of course, creating artificial intelligence virtual patients is already in progress, and probably going to move relatively quickly, because most of that, but not all of it, but most of it is interacting with patients, verbally. And of course, in anesthesia, many of our patients are, when we're doing the most important aspects of the work with them, are no longer awake. So the verbal aspect of large language models and stuff won't apply in those periods of times. But more important, perhaps, is for many arenas, is not just creating the virtual patient that replicates the patient in many different ways, including their changing vital signs and the other things, but is creating virtual coworkers. Because working clinically is usually in teams of various sorts. And, right now, we don't have what the Star Trek holodeck has, where one person can enter the holodeck, and then there are all these other people they have to interact with who are played by the computer, but they are fully believable coworkers in this kind of case. That is, they're fully believable because they can respond to any command or question. They can do all the usual things that whatever role the computer is generating there can do. And we don't have that now. If we want to do a combined team simulation of physicians, nurses, and people of various, different types, we have to get them all together at one time. which is really good because that's sort of how they would work together. But it's, hard to get everybody together at one time. It would be very nice to have the computer be able to generate these other coworkers or other individuals like family members and friends and so forth. But make them so it's just as if you really were interacting with real human beings. We have a long way to go, I think, in doing that. But if you had asked me 2 years ago how long that was going to take, I would say, well, maybe 5 or 10 years if we're lucky. But after what's been happening in the last year and a half, I'm guessing it's going to be the next few years, maybe to get the very top nature of all this. It'll be more than 3 or 4 years. But my guess is it'll be mostly, less than 5 years to accomplish most of these goals. And, as I said, the Star Trek holodeck is, what we use is what we're shooting for, and we'll see. And again, this would allow full multidisciplinary team simulations for even a simple or a single participant. And this is the same image that I showed earlier about the massive hemorrhage event, but the person there who's clearly running this event in the kind of holodeck, she might be the only person who's a real person. That would be cool. So some other goals where artificial intelligence might be useful for simulation or even testing how AI is being used under simulation. But some of these things, people are starting to try and use the generative AI for writing scripts or ideas for clinical encounters to be used with actors or mannequins or doing other kinds of tasks. People are at least thinking about, if not trying to have the AI do pre and post scenario debriefings. There's a lot of those things. We can tell an AI what we think is important to present, and they may be able to do it as well or better than we can. Now, when it comes to things like conducting debriefings or performing assessments on the participants for more complex things than the kinds of simple things that the actors are doing on our medical students, that's something it'll take longer to see whether any of that really is doable using AI or helped by AI. And that also will take a long time. In some of our research on decision-making of anesthesiologists in simulations, we have already switched to AI to do the transcribing of what was said. It used to be done by people, and it cost a non-trivial amount of money to have the transcript typed out from what was heard and seen on the video from the event. But we may then be able to have AIs that can look at the video and the audio and make their assessments of how the performance was. Again, that's going to take a while to determine if that's doable and how well. There's also, I think, a sort of a reverse use of simulation, and that would be to do simulations where the clinicians are working with, say, a patient in a clinic, but one or another of the AI systems that are starting to be put into clinical practice can be assessed by in a simulation setting where we can set up the characteristics and see how the clinicians are find it usable or not. And also we can put our patient actors who are very well trained in representing patients See, what do they feel like when the doctor is using the AI? Or maybe there is no doctor and the AI is the only one, interviewing the patient, examining the patient, and so forth. So using simulation as a means to test some of the AI systems might turn out to be useful. So the overall future of simulation, the real tests of simulation, however it's done, all these other things are the things we're already doing. To really assess how good they are, how useful they are, really needs a long time horizon. A lot of the current studies that have been done address small questions, and this is good stuff that people have done, but it only goes so far. The real question is, does simulation improve the quality and safety of patient care? But only if you have a long-term adoption of it. It's comprehensive, integrated model for a whole career with both training and assessment of performance, and evaluated over a long time horizon, not just after a few months or even a year. For these things to understand their value, it's really going to take a long time, and it's very difficult to study. And we may never really know, because the long studies that would be needed to prove these things, it's very difficult to get the kind of money that it would take to do some of these studies that might take 5 years or 10 years and thousands of patients and hundreds or thousands of clinicians. But we should, continue anyway. And I'm, I'm looking in the future, hopefully, that we aim for a cumulative effect, to have through an entire career a combination of modalities as individuals and teams, and cycling through zero or low tech simulations and task trainers and physical simulation and or extended reality and or artificial intelligence, some in dedicated simulation centers, some in situ, peri situ simulations and drills, all of those things over a whole career. And the vision is that it would be embedded in the structure of work over the entire career, comprehensive and integrated, continuous. I like to say that in this vision, just like in aviation or nuclear power or whatever, you do simulation over your entire career, and the only way you get out of it is either if you retire or die. And that's the way it is in those businesses. And I think that's the way it should be in healthcare. And it should also be coupled with formative assessment in various ways. We're not there yet, but there's been lots of progress made. I have the privilege of having started with it nearly at zero, and based on our own work and that of many others, seeing a huge change between 1986 and 2020, 2024. It's almost 40 years, and it's a huge difference. But we have lots, a lot to go more forward with it, especially for the people who are now experienced clinicians but no longer in training, where we have barely scratched the surface. So, this is how I like to end a lot of my talks, is just use simulation to try and save lives or hearts or brains. And there is a saying, it's in many different sources, but whoever saves a life, it's as though they have saved all of humankind. And that's the reason why all of us are doing, why you're here now on to hear me talk and otherwise. So this is why we do simulation, because we think, and we know actually it's hard to demonstrate for sure, but we know from our experience that there are lives and hearts and brains and whatnot that have been saved through the use of simulation. And it's every time that happens as if it's all of humankind, which, as I like to say, is a pretty nice thing to think about before we go to bed. So, as in Star Trek, I say to all of you, just make it so, number one, all of us, and try and move the ball forward, as we say, and try and make things better for our patients. And thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Gaba, for your excellent presentation. That was really clear, and you really have to see your center, your Stanford STEM Center is just impressive. Your story is really inspiring. And I love the way you talked about simulation, that we don't need that much money and we can go just with storytelling, challenging cases, role-playing actors, and etc. Go into the virtual dissection table, the part task center, the mannequin, the in situ before coming to the XR, VR, or the AI. That was really great. So without further ado, Professor Gaba, we have a lot of questions. I will try to transmit you all the questions. The first one coming from Morocco, Fes, Professor Brahim Bukata. Thank you very much, of course. And he wants to know what you can teach with the watermelon.
Yeah, with the watermelon, that's doing an epidural, and because for an epidural, which is it's going not all the way into the spinal fluid space, but just outside that to deposit the local anesthetic. And there's a feel to that. And it turns out that the rind, as we call it, the tougher part of the watermelon, when you go from there into the part that we eat, you have that feeling of that difference. So that's why a watermelon's good for that.
Okay, thank you so much. That's clear. Second, we have Salvatore Espinoza from Spain, who had the great pleasure to see you at Granada for the SESAM Congress. And he said, how do we see the integration of virtual reality for the development of non-technical skills, and specifically for CRM, crisis resource management? You talk about virtual reality already, but maybe especially for the crisis resource management. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, even now, with the systems that are available, you can have multiple players, if you will, real physical people wearing the headsets and stuff like that, who are interacting with each other, and then with a patient that's created virtually as well. So as I've tried the system even a few years ago, I was impressed by. Because even though I couldn't physically see the other anesthesiologist who was working with me on this, really sick patient virtually, it really did feel like being in an operating room with the patient and a coworker, even though it was virtual. So I think already it's quite possible to do, like I showed. One of the things I'd like to start with is these kinds of situations that we can't recreate, we can't do with physical simulation, because that would improve, that would patch a hole in for the things we can't do. But then the debriefing, I think for the foreseeable future, our debriefings will be done by experienced and trained debriefers. That's where we can extract the maximum out of the experience. And so I think that will still be a major factor. Ultimately, could you have the computer being the debriefer? Well, we'll see.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have another question from Jamila Bugala. Is the sensation in surgery done on a mannequin can be the same in a real patient? It's how realistic can it be for surgery? It is a tricky question.
Yeah, so it's interesting because, and I'm not a super expert on surgical simulation, although I know a fair amount about it. So some surgical simulation has tried to make very, or to address what they think is very important of doing, recreating what's called haptics, how it feels in your hands. Um, and you know that there's more and more progress in that area, although it's tricky. But there's a lot of things where they've determined that it may not be that important, that the feel in the hands is not always that important. And especially for early learners for laparoscopic surgery, where it's more important just learning uh, how to differently visualize and interact with the system, even if you can't feel every nuance of how it feels. So all of these things have to be figured out, you know, in really in very ultimately in fairly complex studies, because a lot of the studies that have been done don't really completely answer these kinds of questions. Um, but certainly, I think it has been pretty well shown now that in taking people from no experience in doing this operation to, you know, through virtual reality, being able to go through the aspects of it, they are better prepared to, you know, learn how to do it on real patients under supervision. So it's another thing we'll see.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're having more questions, of course. We have one from my dear friend, Professor Saijidan, who is coming from the Moroccan Medical Army. And his question is about the future of medical simulation in light of advancement in artificial intelligence, telemedicine, and medical teleconsultation. How do you envision the future of pure simulation learning? Do you believe it will become more virtually, or potentially replacing traditional methods, or do you foresee a different trajectory?
Well, I'm actually in print in a couple of different papers or book chapters, um, of saying probably 20 years ago or so that by the year 2020 or 2025, virtual reality would completely replace physical simulation, um, in healthcare. And well, we certainly didn't do that by 2020, and 2025 is pretty close. And I don't think we will have uh, uh, completely replaced the kinds of things that we're currently doing. But I think there will be a lot more things that may be doable or shown to be useful in virtual realities of various sorts. And I do think it will take a while to determine which ones are really worthwhile that way, which things can, you know, be used for early learners, which things don't really recreate the environments of, you know, the very complicated and stressful situations. And it's going to take a while to figure out which ones are worth doing which way.
Okay, thank you. You're not done yet. I'm sorry for you, but there's still
I'm
some.
I'm I'm here as long as you all want to stay.
Thank you. We're enjoying having you. So we have Mohammed Darwish from Morocco. How can we ensure psychological safety for participants in simulation scenarios, especially when dealing with critical feedback and high stress simulation?
Yeah, I think you would do what we ordinarily have been doing, and you know, psychological safety was really important to us going back into, you know, the late 1980s and you know, forever beyond. And in fact, for the kinds of simulations that my group has been doing in anesthesia, they have all been just for training and education and training. There is nothing that goes back to the department on, you know, who did what, and how good a job did they do. And that's a trade-off that we decided early on, that we wanted to put our emphasis on teaching and learning, and not on assessment. Um, so I think that we can continue that kind of approach using the other modalities of simulation. Now, when it comes down to how, I mean, I think simulation can be used for assessment, but that should be different than the ones that are used for education and training. And I think it's very important that if people are being assessed and scored, they should know that they're being assessed and scored. What I never want to see is people doing a simulation and everybody thinks it's just for their education, but secretly people are getting scored, and that information is going back to their their boss or to the department. So it's I think we can do those things. We can do the things that are appropriate, to be done, if you will, secretly or without going back to the department, and doing the things that which we do. Some of the things with medical students are specifically their tests, and they're important tests with the standardized patient actors, but everybody knows it's a test, and I think that's appropriate too. So, but I do think we need to be on the lookout for things that are not being done fairly.
Yes, it was really interesting answer. Thank you so much. We have the question from a young from a young one, Osama Erdo. What advice do you have for young medical students who are interested in medical simulation, and how can they effectively contribute to this field?
Yeah, well, I think in every academic institution that has people doing running the simulations and stuff, there are going to be people who are interested in all the different aspects of what the future holds, whether it's virtual reality or artificial intelligence or both of those or other things in simulation. And we're always eager to find younger people who are interested in these things and who can work with us in our research or other work, and thereby learn a lot and maybe find something that they want to do throughout their medical career. So yeah, I would just check with your institution and see who's in these kinds of activities already, and see if there's something where they'd like to have somebody helping them out.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that he have good mentors there, and they are with us. Okay, so for Mesa, I think that she's from Tunisia. Simulation held. How can simulation held implement cognitive aids in operating room, mainly with the new context with digital decision support tools with in an anesthesia information management system?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions about how different kinds of digital devices, computer devices can help us in those kinds of settings. Many of you may know that our group at Stanford is also one of the world leaders in creating emergency manuals, and in various different types, and currently not with any AI, but maybe eventually with AI. I will say we have created, and for our own use, we have various different versions of those things, including a physical thing on paper, but it's a better than paper because you can wipe it down and stuff like that. But there's one thing you can do with those things in paper that you can't do with your phone or a computer or whatever. And that is, you can either drop it on the ground or slam it into the ground, and that's not going to break that piece of paper. And whereas I wouldn't recommend doing that with your phone. So there's a lot of different issues about what can and should be done with AI underneath it. Under what circumstances is that really going to be valuable, or do we already know how to package some of the information in a very usable ways that doesn't need AIs and stuff? and what kinds of things do we really need that for, or really need the other modalities for. So it's one of many, many things that we're going to need to figure out over time, because they're not so easy to really understand. And simulation will be an important way to study these things, because many of the events that are, you know, serious and complicated, fortunately, don't occur every day, or, you know, they may occur every day in a busy, you know, emergency department or OR suites, but you know, the really serious things are uncommon, which is good. That's, you know, having been a patient many times, that's what we want. We want it all to, you know, to be easy and go well. So it's hard to, you know, do studies in real patients where, you know, it only applies when, you know, a few times something bad happens. So we'll see.
Yeah, I totally agree. For Mohammed Darwish again, in what ways can simulation be used to teach cultural competencies and sensitivity?
Uh, yeah, that'll be interesting. You know, currently, like at Stanford, we have for the actors, we have a pool of about 100 to 120 actors that we can call from to cast our our you know, our little plays, if you will. So, you know, we have in the Bay Area, we have lots of experienced actors, but there's not enough theater work for them all to be doing simultaneously. So they like to do some of the work with us. We pay them, of course. You know, it remains to be seen again what kind of situations and behaviors of people playing actors, people playing patients or family members or these other roles. You know, what can be done with, you know, a artificial system, and what can currently only be done with a really trained human actor. And I think that's another thing that we'll have to just try and figure out over time. And it's not so easy to figure out, but everybody will be trying to see what works and doesn't.
Yeah, totally. You're almost at the end of your trouble. Last question. Garcia Adenes, it's a Spanish, he's from Spanish Society. AA could act as an instructor, giving feedbacks, but do you think it is possible to act as a facilitator?
Well, part of me would like to think that nothing could replace, you know, people like me and many of you who have, you know, are on this today. You know, because we've worked hard to learn how to do, or to figure it out as we, you know, started out, how to be a really good facilitator and deal with lots of sometimes challenging situations and interactions with our participants. I suspect there are going to be a number of things that may be simple enough that in the next year or two, you know, you can. I think it's very likely there will be computer-based facilitators for task training, especially for the things where it's easy to measure the task performance, which is true for some activities, but not necessarily for all activities. You know, whether for complex, multi-participant, complex scenarios, in which sometimes, you know, we've purposefully embedded psychological challenges and things like that. You know, probably it won't take as long as part of me would hope to get to AIs that can do that and do that well. But, you know, we'll see.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want just to thank, Gracia Adenas. It's a real pleasure to have you there with us, participating to this webinar. And it was the last question. So thank you so much, Professor Gaba. I really want to express my sincere gratitude for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you so much. I want also to thank the audience for their active participation. We're 20 minutes late, so everyone was really interested in that and engaged in that. Thank you so much. But before concluding, we have two surprises, but I'm not going to be the one to say the two surprises. I will give the honor to our dear Professor Mohawi. Professor Mohawi, thank you again for all
Thank you,
that.
Aziza, for your amazing moderation. Thank you, Professor David Gaba, for this wonderful lecture. It was very interesting to hear you. And once again, thank you very much for all I have learned during my visit to Stanford University. So before announcing the two surprise, I would like give the floor to my best friend and with whom we start together simulation in Morocco, this wonderful adventure. I'm talking about Professor Ahmed Ghassel Adib. Stage is yours, Ahmed Ghassel.
Thank you, Mohammed, for this opportunity. Today we are living a dream come true for many of us. Professor Gaba, you are a legend for the history, for next centuries. You brought a new teaching model. You brought simulation is technique, a pedagogical technique, not a technology. You brought crisis resource management in healthcare. You brought 11 5 dimensions, many things. We are millions all over the world studying and teaching with your spirit and what you give to teaching and to assessment and many things. So we are very proud to be here this night. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Aziza, for this opportunity. I talk with the heart, so you are leading the way for many. And when we hear you in your presentation, we see the wisdom acquisitions. It's a concentration of years of reflection and of practical of teaching and simulation and healthcare also. And we see how wisdom acquisition lead to be modest, humble, in phase with what's going on, and with a vision for the future. And I retend that simulation is integrated with all teaching methodologies, integrated with all assessment methodologies, especially formative assessment. And we can use every technology, even simple low-cost models, animal models, everything that we have to put in curriculum in the blue value that will bring to teaching. And your conclusion with our the quotes from the Quran, our holy Quran, وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا كَمَنْ أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. It's I think the spirit of what all we want to do. We are building systems, we are building curricula for serving humanity and serving people and civil lives. And that's what all for. And thank you very much. I'm very honored and proud to be here this night with you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. And it's wonderful for me to hear from other people about how my work has influenced them and made possible these things that, as you say, we are all trying to do so very hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed Ghassan. We feel really your heart talking about this. So thank you very much. I have two surprises to announce you, and I would like to start by the first one. So since 3 days, I'm very honored and I'm very glad to announce that Morocco CM has been affiliated officially with SSH. SSH stands for Society for Simulation and Healthcare. Thank you once again, Professor David Gaba, for your support. It was very quick and I'm sure we will do together a hard work for the best simulation ever, inshallah. I have the second surprise. So we'll be organizing the first international e-conference about training and simulation for patient safety. It's about an e-conference that maybe will invite a lot of speakers around the world. We've met a lot of people at the recent European Congress of Prague, and inshallah we'll do something very, very interesting. One announcement. Yeah, one announcement. So the next webinar will be about the debriefing with good judgment. But I have a great news. We will do it with the live translation. So even if you don't speak French, no problem. So for the upcoming webinar, it will be led in French, but with simultaneous translation in English. It will be animated by my dear and friend, Professor Olio Diniz from France, and my friend.
Who is here? He's present.
He's Denis, are you here? Denis, you are still here? Okay. So Denis Olio and Ubaja Huda, and the webinar will be moderated by my dear friend, Professor Muhajir Mohammed. We are organizing our upcoming masterclass about how to publish in medical pedagogy. And last but not the least, reminding you our upcoming annual meeting, HTIC, which stands for Healthcare Training and Innovation Conference. It will be located in Oujda about around 20 to 22 February 2025. That's all. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor David Gara, for all. I'm very, very, very grateful to you. Thank you, Aziza. You were amazing. Very good. Good job. Thank you, Ahmed Ghassan Adib. Thank you, Spanish, Tunisia, Rwanda, Congo Brazzaville, Mali. We have at least 20 countries participating in this webinar, and we are very proud of. Thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Mohammed, maybe a picture if they put their camera and you take a picture for it.
If you don't mind, yeah. Shall we maybe take a picture of
the comment? Yes.
Okay, I will. So I will put a massive gallery. So please, everyone, activate your webcam. Okay, everyone. Oh, Widad Hmini is here. Good.
Nasik.
Oh, Nasik is
here.
Oh, yes, I see it. Okay, okay.
Ala Khalid, the best technicians ever.
Okay, everyone, if you can please activate your webcam, it will be very nice of you. Okay, more people again. It's okay. When I will say 3, 2, 1, you will say simulation. Okay. 3, 2, 1, simulation.
Simulation.
That's good. Bye-bye. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.